What's happening, AP Euro? All right, so I thought it would be easier for me to just record these last couple slides about why England was in the ascendancy at the end of the 1700s. So last we had mentioned things like the enclosure movement, England's giant empire, thanks to their victory in the 7 Years' War. All right, and so they've got all these resources and the benefits of empire pouring in. And so international trade, specifically things connected to shipping and maritime trade, are absolutely booming. We had mentioned that food, right, was becoming more easily abundant to support a growing population. And so the last thing we want to look at then is how does this impact society? Okay, so with growing populations, we have more people. And with those people, they have to go somewhere. And we already mentioned that farmers were more efficient and effective than ever before, which means we don't need more farmers. There's even less land enclosures. So where do we go? People move to the cities, right? And so we start to notice places like London exploding in population, well over 1 million people by the end of the century. But we also have new urban centers starting to pop up, places like Liverpool, Manchester, Newcastle upon Tyne. Right? These cities are going to grow hugely in population, and that's going to be the groundwork for eventually the Industrial Revolution. Right? Factories will pop up in those places with population. Sadly, though, it also brings with it the problems of population density. And so here's a little cartoon or a panel called the gin lanes, right? And so imagine what these cities would look like. We don't have public sanitation, right? So London won't have a public sewer work until the middle of the 19th century. And so you've got waste and animal waste clogging up these unpaved roads. We've got alcoholism. You've got taverns everywhere. Prostitution goes through the roof. We also have organized crime becoming an issue. Many of these houses, the poorer income apartments, are still made out of lumber or timber. And so they're fire traps, overcrowded when diseases break out like cholera or measles. These cities just get ravaged by disease. They're not great places. I mean, like, it's not like, oh, yay, I live in London like it is today, like a major swanky metropolitan center. Back then, it would have been a bit of a filthy pigsty. And so you can imagine, right? For the wealthy, though, for the middle class, and when I say middle class, I'm talking about millionaires. These are the people who will own factories. These are people who own shipping companies, banking firms, insurance companies, right? This new affluent group in society, they're flaunting their money, right? They own a home, a residence in the city. They own one in the countryside. They want to gamble, right? So some of the growing leisure time of the period isn't just like, reading books or enlightened philosophy. It's horse racing, it's boxing, it's cockfighting, it's gambling here, watching cats tear into rats, right? And so you'd pick a rat and see which rat died first, which one died last, how many rats die before the cat stops killing, right? All these stupid things, but they become ways that people waste their money. They gamble for fun. And so those become the leisure activities of the wealthy. And so we start to have a real class system in society. And there's a lot of stereotypes about these classes. And so here's Thomas Malthus, right, a famous demographer of the time period. I'm just going to pick the highlights here. But if you notice, he's encouraging narrower streets, people crowded into houses. He actually wants the plague to return. Stagnant water, right? We shouldn't be stopping disease. Why? Because ultimately what he's trying to argue is like the way things are going, people are getting married as like teenagers and they're living these horrible lives because we're experiencing overpopulation. And if you think about supply and demand, the supply of common laborers, of people, is through the roof, but the demand for these common people is stagnant or low. And so the value of the human is decreasing. It's a really gross way of looking at it, but he actually wants less people. If you think of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens and you think of Ebenezer Scrooge, right? There's that famous part where they're talking about Christmas and donations to the poor. And the one man says, oh, but many people would rather die than live in the poorhouses. And Scrooge responds, well, then they better get on with it and decrease the surplus population. How Malthusian, right? To look at common people as unnecessary, a burden on society. All right, so England is doing so well. They have so many people that we're starting to actually get into the what do we do with all the extra people as they flood into the cities. But this will lay the groundworks for the Industrial Revolution, a labor force who's going to be a very low income, kind of captive labor force to power on factories. All right, guys, hopefully that makes sense, and take care.